So these will be, this is our model this week, Susan Montenegro. So that's kind of cool. And you can actually send them your drawings and they'll post them during the, they can post them during the intermission that they take when they do their intermission. Okay, so for a figure drawing, for a gesture drawing, what you want to do is you want to always start with a line of action. So we've got her body's moving back into space and her leg is coming out here. So, and it's kind of the similar thing to do if you're drawing anything that you're drawing rapidly is going to be considered a gesture drawing. So that's sort of a new idea for me that's interesting to discover that people can do gesture drawings of plants, because I wouldn't have thought that would be something that people would do. Okay, so I'm trying to get her, oh man, this one's hard. Her torso is actually a lot shorter than I thought I had it, because here's her hips right here. Here's her knee right here between her arms. So I need to move her arm over here and this arm down here. And then her back foot. So you keep your pencil moving in a gesture drawing pretty much all the time. And you don't even need to pick your pencil up from the paper that much. All right, so that's my gesture drawing. And that's pretty much what I'm expecting to see when I look at people's gesture drawings in the classroom. So don't try to draw it realistic, and don't try to draw it realistically, but don't necessarily try to get all these details in, because it's only a 1-minute pose. How much detail can you get in there? So there's her head, her torso is slightly angled.
What are you doing, Luna?
Shh. Foot here, other foot here. Her legs like so. Now she's upside down, but that's still, it's a little bit lower than middle because she's also got her head bent. But if you can imagine this being added to the bottom, then we couldn't say that this is half the height of the figure. So you kind of do a linear construction first and then build up. Her legs are starting to fall. But that's how it is when you draw from a live model. It's really much better than drawing from a photograph. The model is going to move, and it's up to the artist to accommodate that. Oh no, she's doing the other side. That's kind of interesting. Okay. Use really cheap paper, and don't. I like using the charcoal pencils because they have more. I have more control over it. I'm trying to find the line of action. Now I've got her knee in the right place this time. In between her hands. I don't really like the way that they switch the camera view on us all the time, but I guess that is just part of the process there. This hand is further down on the horizontal plane. Her head is in front of her shoulders, so keep in mind your overlaps, because they're important for building depth in your figure. Her knee is coming towards us, so we can draw a perspective cylinder. And her feet are on the same plane, so it's good to check that across. You can see how this is a cylinder going away from us and ends up in front of her foot. So getting the overlaps is really important to getting the actual gesture of the figure, getting a good gesture. Ah, so when you're just warming up, it doesn't really matter if you overlap or cross over on your figures as you're drawing. You can save the paper as much as you like. But if you're going to be turning it in, then you need to leave more space or draw one to a page for ones that you're actually going to be turning in so that they're cleanly presented. Presentation is really important. It's something that is hard to learn when you're in school, but if you don't, when you get into the business world, people expect it. So you might as well just practice it now. I like to keep in a number of sharp pencils so that I can always grab a fresh one. Your fingers are lower than her feet. You see that on the horizontal? If you guys have any questions while I'm doing this, go ahead and just unmute and ask so that I don't have to go hunting for the chat box. So I'm trying to develop the cylindrical shapes of the legs. And there's also it's hidden because of the overlaps, but the torso, the pelvis, and then the rib cage is under here. And she's got her hair in the way, which normally I wouldn't allow that in a drawing group that I was running, that's for sure, because we need to get that hair out of the way of the body part so we can see what's going on. Now this camera that they're using to film this has a very truncated depth of field, which makes it a little more challenging. In other words, it's harder to see depth the way the camera is set up, and that makes it a little more difficult to figure out where in space these parts of the body are. So if at all possible, get yourself into a real figure drawing group with a real live model and draw from life, or get someone to sit for you and pose for you. That's always the best thing. It's to just have somebody, do a trade or something. Somebody sit for you, you can sit for them. You can make them dinner, fix their car, or whatever your specialty is, if they can sit for you.
An issue I'm having
Mm-hmm.
is getting a proper line of action.
Okay, usually I'll follow the spine first. That's usually my first go-to spot. So we've got this one line of action here, and she's bending in the middle. So you can either take it up, curve it up, and then down for that leg, and then a secondary line of action for the other leg, or you can do them as two separate lines that join in the middle. And then there's actually more than one line of action because there's one for her shoulders too. We're following, it's almost like the stick figures, but mostly you follow the line of the spine. If you can't see the spine, like in a foreshortened one, then normally what I would do is switch to shapes like I do for animals because you can't see their bones as well, and they're mostly just big furry shapes, mostly. That's my approach. Somebody else might tell you different, but that's how I do it. So if you figure out, if you can follow the line of the main line of the body, then the legs, and then the arms to get your line of action. It should be flowing. I mean, it should be quick. It should. I've seen some people do their line of action like this, but that's not quick enough. They need to be faster than that. So here's her line right here. You could even start with her butt, actually, and go legs and then torso. That would be your basic line of action. And then her arms going back up over her head like that. So there's 2 lines of action, 3, and then her head hanging down.
Okay then.
Does that help?
Be yelling.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. It's nice when after you get the main line of action, look for the other rhythmic qualities of the figure, like the thigh and then the calf tends to do a curving action to it, and her arms, she's got hyperextensive elbows, which looks really weird when you draw it. So if your model has hyperextensive elbows, you can try to convince them not to put their arms so straight. Usually it's only women that have the loose joints in the shoulders, like in the elbows like that. And then you want to build up the rest of your figure with round spherical shapes with objects so that you can build the sense of volume in your figure. All right. So another thing about the line of action that's really helpful for doing when you do it is that it helps you get your figure laid out on the paper so that, okay, so now I can see that. If I'm going to have her foot right here, then I kind of need to move her body up a little bit. And the torso is about 3 of the 8 heads or so of the figure. So you can still divide the figure in half from head to toe. And that's about the base of the torso. And then there's a head down from there, about a head and a half to the shoulders. So keep those. The whole point of doing the gesture drawing, oh yes, I said I would explain why. Why do we do gesture drawing? Well, it's like target practice. And it helps us to assess and indicate the parts of the figure quickly. Or if it's landscape or anything, actually, you do a gesture drawing first. You kind of see the whole of the whatever it is that you're drawing and its relationship to all of its parts. So it helps you get your scene on your figure or whatever it is you're drawing on the page so that you don't spend a lot of time drawing on one thing only to find you've run out of paper, you run out of room. So here she's has a standing position, so we can divide her completely in half like that. And it's a little distracting having the close-up on her back, but I usually draw in a rib cage, a pelvis, which I usually make as a triangle, and then halfway between the hips and the feet or the knees. You can see that there's a natural curve to the body that is a rhythmic curve. Notice how the elbows come right down to the middle, right down to the waist. Perfect. And then her hands it looks really unnatural, unfortunately. But I'm not going to worry too much about it because it's just a gesture drawing. So it's more about getting the figure down in its proportion and position and not about necessarily creating perfect realism, okay? Yet. You'll use that later. Let's see. Now, let's see, we've got a foreshortened version of her torso here. So I'll start with her head, but her torso and the line of action comes forward, and her butt is really pretty close to her head if you were to put a vertical line and horizontal line across your plane of vision. You can see her head is here, her shoulders are here, her hand is here. So I'm going to overlap shapes, cylinders. This is coming towards us. Her heel is up above her hand just a little bit. So if you do this enough by looking at reference or looking at a model, then when you want to make something up, it'll be a lot easier because you'll have a library in your head of shapes and positions of the human body and how things are supposed to go together. So it's a lot easier to make things look realistic because you've been practicing. It's like playing somebody else's music for years to learn how to play the instrument, and then you can make up your own music. But first you have to practice other people's music. That kind of makes sense if you think about it. How can you learn to create something if you don't know how it's made in the first place? So if you want to draw, it only applies, of course, if you want to draw realistically. If you want to draw abstractly or impressionistically, then go for it. Do whatever you feel. But if your goal is to draw realistically, then it makes sense that you study from reality in order to build an understanding in your visual mind of realism. It's all quick, it's all messy, but with luck, you're memorizing the sequence of shapes and the proportions. 1 minute is not much. You're not going to get everything in 1 minute. So she's standing with her arms up in the air, so I'm going to start her a little bit lower and a little bit smaller, just because I want to be able to have her hand, which makes a line of action that kind of goes like this. And then we've got shoulders, and the other leg halfway down between the head and the toes. Halfway between the hip and the floor. See how she's balanced too. You want to look for that line of gravity, the gravitational center of the figure. It's right above where her foot hits the ground. There's lots of different ways to do gesture drawings. This isn't the only way, but this is the way that I do it, and it's worked for me. I used to hate gesture drawing. Hated it. I only liked to do long poses because I wanted to take my time. But if you learn the figure quickly, the basic proportions, then you can sketch in your figure rapidly and then spend all the rest of the time that you have to your use to draw detail. So it kind of makes sense. I like the poses this model's doing. They have a nice fluidity. They're interesting. And so if you do enough of these, you do enough gesture drawings, you can actually have sketchbooks full of them. I have hundreds of sketchbooks. And then when you want to get a pose, you just flip through your sketchbooks until you find one that you've drawn. It'll already be familiar to you, and you can use that to build a character from, if that's what your desire is.
That's what I do. That's why I think they're important to keep them.
Well, I have way more than I could ever possibly use. So And I would prefer to keep ones from, oh, there's more space on this paper. I would prefer to keep my journals. So when I go to a figure drawing class or a group with a live model, I'll do all my quick gestures in a sketchbook that I keep. And this is good for practice, but it's kind of like a stopgap practice. You should be drawing from life. This is not the only way, and this is not the way that you should focus on drawing, but you should be there in the room with the model and not just looking at her on a screen. There's a whole different sensibility when you're actually in the room with the model and the artist and the model actually having a kind of a conversation. And that's what figurative art's about. I mean, if you're learning the figures so that you can make up your own stuff, it's a slightly different thing. But for the practice, drawing from a real human being is going to make your imaginary human beings look a lot more realistic when you actually draw them. So wherever I worked in all the game industry, all the gaming places that I worked in the 90s, wherever I worked, I would start a figure drawing group. And we had a model come in, and everyone would come down and draw. Mostly the animators would come and draw for the first 20 minutes where there were 1 and 2 minute gestures, and then sometimes they would leave when the poses got too long, because they'd like to do the quick ones. And that's what they do. That's part of their job, really. And then the other artists, like background artists or interface artists, whatever, would stay for the long poses. And sometimes the animators would too, but I just found in general, the animators preferred the short poses and the environment artists prefer the long poses. So see how there's so little space between her heel? I mean, you know her leg is moving back into the distance there, but if you actually look at the space between her thigh and her heel, it's not much. And we have an overlap of her foot and her leg, and then her leg and her lower leg. That will help you get your proportions right as well by utilizing that negative space. So you run out of room, you run out of time, you run out of time. I try to work over my whole figure evenly if possible, so that when the model stops, I still have a fairly complete, or at least cohesive drawing. It's a little harder to do that when you're talking. But so here's her head, here's her shoulders, there's a foreshortened view. Here's her hips right here, and then she's got the leg coming out. So that's how I deal with the foreshortening of the torso when I can't see a good line of action. There's only one on her leg. The other one you can't really see. This is coming towards us, and you can see how the camera really flattens it out. You have to kind of intuitively know or have seen enough human bodies to know that the elbow is as long as the upper arm, but because we're looking at it head on like this, it's not going to be drawn that long. It's all an illusion. You could say everything is an illusion. Let's see. This is her shoulder here, and that's her. So it's okay to make adjustments as you go too, and don't bother trying to erase. There's no point. So if you were to ask me, how do I apply that to a plant for the observational drawing, I would say that each line of the plant, there's a plant right over here. Maybe I'll train a camera on it and draw it like a gesture drawing. It's quite a complicated plant. I made her torso a little bit too long, so I'm going to build her leg up on this side of it, of the line. You can see the bony landmarks here. We're going to be talking a lot about that in the 102 class. There's her bottom of her rib cage. There's elbows. Actually, if her head is here, her elbow should actually be over here. So it's good to check yourself and go back and make the corrections. Don't just accept it as like, oh, well, that's wrong, because you'll teach yourself the wrong way. Don't yawn, girl. You make us all yawn. The model's yawning. It's not good. I like her attitude there, though. She's got more of a curve in her spine than I originally put, so I put a little more curve in there. She's got some crazy limbs.
I have to go offline real quick, but I'll
Okay.
be back on in probably about 10 minutes.
Okay, no worries. It's really hard drawing heads upside down, but it's good practice. And you start seeing the head as a different thing. You see how her knee and her hand line up? And this knee is going way back into space, so we can draw that telescoping cylinder. But her foot looks as big in the background as the one is in the front, and that's the camera that's doing that. The foot here should be quite a bit larger because it's closer to us. And that's where you have to be super careful when you're drawing from camera, anything taken by a camera, whether it's a live video feed like this or if it's a photograph, because this foot needs to be smaller in order to look like it's moving back into space. All right, I guess that was the first 20 minutes. That's a basic gesture.